All right, so got a question here on the WhatsApp group that I wanted to discuss in more detail. This person asks, being on a heavily Malaysian with limited clean choices that are affordable, Malaysian diet with limited clean choices that are affordable, what's the best way to approach eating clean? I responded to this asking, let's make sure we're on the same page first. When you say clean, what exactly are you referring to? What are some typical options that are outside your budget? And the reason I like to establish the context here, I'm not trying to be pedantic, but many people have different definitions of what clean is. So I just wanted to make sure that we were speaking with similar terms and definitions. That way we're not talking past each other. They followed up and said, so things like salmon, quinoa, etc. are on the pricier side of things. Local cuisine is very hearty, curries, coconut milk, etc. My version of clean at the moment is minimal sugar, portion-controlled servings of less oily selections at the mixed rice stall, usually like stir-fried vegetables, steamed meats, egg, and tofu. Okay, so the first thing I would say if you're trying to lose some weight, start eating clean, you've already started, putting yourself in the right direction. Minimal sugar, portion-controlled servings, less oily selections, like very, very good first steps. Now, when it comes to shopping for yourself, some of the things that you can buy, you mentioned things like salmon, quinoa, etc., are on the pricier side of things. So this is part of the reason why I asked about what you mean by clean, because this isn't the first time this has happened. I've had people ask like, oh, I'm trying to diet, I'm trying to go for cleaner options, but the problem is it's all expensive. And they'll bring up things like this, salmon, quinoa. I've had things as crazy as like agave nectar, acai. And my response to this is always something along the lines of, one, don't buy it, or two, there's kind of this implied assumption that all of these things are necessary to eat clean or to eat for weight loss, and they absolutely aren't. So in the case of salmon, like, I wouldn't eat salmon. If it's too expensive, if it's outside my budget, I just wouldn't eat salmon. And even in America, I mean, salmon is kind of like a more premium protein. It's not like the highest you could go. It's not the most expensive, but it's definitely above like chicken breast, turkey, anything like that. So I would just go for cheaper protein options. I wouldn't, feel like I have to eat salmon. There are plenty of other protein sources that will give you plenty of protein, even plenty of fat if you want the added fat. Probably cheaper cuts of fish. There are many, many protein options out there other than salmon that are likely going to be within your budget. Things like quinoa. I mean, if you really, really want to eat quinoa, and similarly, if you really, really want to eat salmon, this might just come down to, okay, how bad do you want it? If you really want it that bad, it might just be something you have to do. It might be less of a dieting focus we need to have here and more of a financial focus. How do we fit this into our budget if it's something we really want? But something like quinoa, again, if it's too expensive for the local currency, the local exchange rate, I would say don't buy it. I would go towards cheaper options. Potatoes, often very cheap. Everywhere I've been, everywhere I've seen. Rice, especially in an Asian country, I would imagine is pretty abundant and also relatively cheap. You could even do some things like buying a bread machine and making your own bread at home. If you don't want to spend the extra money to make it, or to buy it in the store, you can just make it yourself. If you really want to go the extra route, I've made my own sourdough. That's what I do nowadays. But you can just buy a bread machine and it'll do it for you. So that's another option there. This is a very common thing. This is why I felt it was necessary to discuss this, because there are a lot of people who think eating healthy or eating for weight loss inherently means you have to spend more money. You have to spend extra money on premium products. And I definitely don't think that's the case. Another example, beans, legumes, very relatively cheap carb source. So these might not necessarily be your preferred foods, but I think it was Thomas Sowell that said, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. So to a certain extent, a trade-off has to be made here. Like, do you want the more expensive things that you would like to eat and prefer to eat? Or would you rather have things that are still going to get the job done, maybe not be your preferred source of food for whatever it is, your protein, carbs, and fats, but they're still going to get the job done. They're still going to, be able to feed you, fill you up, and keep you on track with your diet. And then the other thing, I also wanted to mention here, you said, portion controlled servings of less oily selections at the mixed rice stall, usually like stir fried vegetables, steamed meats, egg, and tofu. Those are good options. I like the stir fried vegetables. Getting steamed meats rather than, deep fried or anything like that. Awesome. Egg and tofu, always solid choices there. But with that said, there is one thing I want to touch on here. At the mixed rice stall, I'm guessing this is like a place you're going and buying food, a prepared meal. The honest to God truth here is that if you are really serious about weight loss, if you are really serious about taking control of your diet for whatever purpose it is, whether it's building muscle, losing fat, improving your overall body composition, if it really is that important to you, you cannot outsource this stuff. This has to be something that you take control of in your life. The less control you have over something, the less room you have to complain. Because if you're outsourcing something, if you're hiring somebody else to do it, you're giving up control. So if you really want to make progress here, bring as much of that stuff in-house as you can. And again, this might require some trade-offs. It might require like, hey, you might say, well, I work 5 days a week. This is just one thing that I do for my lunches. Okay, fair enough. The time. But maybe the trade-off here is that on Sunday morning, before you get on with your day, you have to spend the week meal prepping, getting your meals ready so that you're not reliant on the oilier options at the food stall. It's not the answer people always want to hear. But the less control you have over anything that you're doing in your life, if you're, I think you get the point here, but if you want to see progress in this way, owning as much of that as possible, and especially something like food, because there's only usually so much transparency you can have into food preparation. So the certain sauces that they're using, you might not be able to see them cook. You don't know how much oil they're using. You're giving up control. You're giving up visibility and transparency into what's happening. Whereas when you're cooking, you know exactly how much of whatever ingredient's being used. You can control oils. You can control sauces, everything like that. So I think that would be my recommendation here. Don't get so caught up on the premium products. Feel free to go and embrace going the cheaper route with some of these options. Continue doing what you're doing because you've done some very good things so far. And then as much as possible, try to limit the amount of external food that you're eating. Try and bring as much of that in-house as you can. And this is one reason why, if you're just going to look at what I call professional weight manipulators, whether it's for weight loss or weight gain, I'm referring to bodybuilders here. If you look at professional weight manipulators, very rarely do they outsource their diet. Now, once they get to like a level where they're ballin', they can just afford to hire the personal chef. Okay, but then they're controlling it. They're basically just outsourcing the labor. They are telling them, I need this much oil, this much rice, this much chicken. Everything's controlled. It's just somebody else is doing it for them. But there's a reason that these guys do it. There's a reason that these guys don't go out to eat and go to McDonald's or go to some restaurant, even if they're serving, quote, clean food, because you start asking those questions about how much olive oil did you use to prepare this, they can't answer it. So I hope that's helpful, and feel free to let me know if you have any questions.